The expensive leather wallet could have disappeared forever into the busy streets of Chicago, where thousands of strangers hurried past every single day without looking back. Inside it was nearly $5,000 in cash, priceless family photographs, confidential business cards, and an old folded letter that meant more than money could ever buy. The powerful CEO who owned it believed it was gone forever. But fate had placed that wallet into the tiny hands of someone the world barely noticed, a 7-year-old girl whose own family struggled just to afford dinner. No one expected what would happen next. And when the little girl made just one simple request after returning it, the successful businessman broke down in tears in front of everyone. Before we begin, if you believe kindness still exists, that honesty can change lives, and that everyone deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more heartwarming stories like this to life. It was a chilly autumn morning in downtown Chicago, Illinois. The sidewalks were crowded with office workers carrying coffee cups, taxis rushed through intersections, and towering glass buildings reflected the golden sunrise. Among the crowd walked a small girl named Grace, wearing a faded pink sweater that had once belonged to her older cousin. She held tightly onto her grandmother Margaret's hand as they made their daily walk to the community food pantry before school. Life had never been easy for Grace. After losing both of her parents in a tragic car accident 2 years earlier, she had been raised by her grandmother in a tiny apartment on the city's west side. Margaret worked long hours cleaning offices at night despite her aching knees and failing eyesight. Every dollar mattered. Sometimes they skipped meals so the rent could be paid. Yet Margaret had always taught Grace one lesson above everything else. She would remind her that people could lose everything except their character, and honesty was worth more than riches. As they crossed the street near one of Chicago's luxury hotels, Grace noticed something lying beside the curb. It was a brown leather wallet, thick enough to suggest it contained far more than a few dollars. Curious, she bent down and picked it up carefully before dusting it off. Margaret opened it slowly, expecting to find perhaps an identification card. Instead, both of them stared in disbelief. Hundreds of dollar bills were neatly stacked inside. There were several credit cards, business cards with the name Michael Carter, and a driver's license identifying him as the CEO of one of the country's largest technology companies. Margaret's heart raced. $5,000 could transform their lives overnight. It could pay months of rent, buy warm winter clothes, repair the broken heater in their apartment, and fill their refrigerator with groceries for weeks. For a brief moment, the weight of poverty whispered dangerous thoughts into her tired mind. But before she could say anything, Grace quietly closed the wallet. The little girl looked up with innocent eyes and softly reminded her grandmother that someone must be terrified right now. Whoever lost it probably needed it back just as much as they wished they could keep it. Margaret smiled sadly, realizing that the child she had raised possessed a stronger heart than many adults ever would. Together they walked toward the hotel lobby listed on one of the business cards. Inside, panic filled the elegant marble entrance. Security guards spoke urgently into radios while several employees searched every corner of the lobby. Michael Carter had just realized his wallet was missing moments before an important meeting with international investors. Although he could replace the money and the credit cards, he was devastated by the thought of losing the faded handwritten letter tucked inside. That letter had been written by his late mother on the day before she passed away from cancer nearly 15 years earlier. It was the last thing she had ever written to him. He carried it everywhere as a reminder never to let success replace compassion. When security informed him that a little girl wished to return something, Michael hurried outside. He immediately recognized the wallet. For several seconds he couldn't even speak. Everything was still inside exactly as he had left it. The cash remained untouched. The credit cards were perfectly arranged. Even the old family photographs were safely tucked away. Michael stared at Grace with disbelief. He knew that many adults facing financial hardship might have kept the wallet without hesitation. Yet this child had walked across several blocks simply to return it. Overwhelmed with gratitude, Michael reached inside the wallet and pulled out several $100 bills, insisting that Grace accept them as a reward. Margaret politely declined, explaining that honesty should never come with a price. Michael insisted again. This time Grace looked down for a moment before quietly saying she would only ask for one thing. The bustling hotel entrance suddenly fell silent. Everyone expected the little girl to request money for food, clothes, or a better home. Instead, Grace looked directly into Michael's eyes with remarkable sincerity. Her only request was that he never forget people like her grandmother, the invisible workers who cleaned offices after everyone else went home. She asked him to remember that behind every shining building were ordinary people working through pain, exhaustion, and loneliness just to help others live comfortably. She hoped he would always treat workers with kindness because many of them were grandparents raising children alone. The word struck Michael harder than any business negotiation ever had. Suddenly he remembered the letter inside his wallet. With trembling hands, he unfolded the fragile paper and reread one sentence written years ago by his mother. It reminded him that true success would never be measured by wealth, but by the number of lives he lifted along the way. Tears rolled down his face. For years he had been consumed by quarterly profits, expanding his company, and impressing shareholders. Somewhere along the journey he had forgotten the simple values his mother had worked so hard to teach him. Standing before a 7-year-old girl, he realized that wisdom sometimes arrived in the smallest voices. Over the following weeks, Michael couldn't stop thinking about Grace and Margaret. He quietly visited the office buildings his company owned during late-night cleaning shifts. For the first time in years, he spoke with janitors, maintenance workers, cafeteria employees, and security guards. He listened to their stories instead of simply walking past them. He discovered single parents working double shifts, elderly employees delaying retirement because they couldn't afford medicine, and hard-working families sacrificing everything for their children. Many had served the company faithfully for decades without ever speaking personally to the CEO. Michael knew something had to change. Within 3 months, his company introduced major improvements. Wages increased for hourly workers. Healthcare benefits expanded. Educational scholarships were created for employees' children and grandchildren. Emergency financial assistance programs helped families facing unexpected hardships. Most importantly, every employee, regardless of position, received the same respect and recognition. News of these changes spread across the country. Business magazines praised Michael's leadership, but he privately knew the credit belonged to one honest little girl. Meanwhile, Grace continued living her simple life. She never bragged about returning the wallet. She still walked to school with her grandmother. She still volunteered at the local church food pantry on weekends. She still believed doing the right thing should never depend on whether someone was watching. Several months later, shortly before Christmas, Michael invited Grace and Margaret to his company's annual holiday celebration. In front of hundreds of employees, he shared the story without embarrassing the little girl. He explained how one act of honesty had changed the direction of an entire corporation. Then he announced the creation of the Grace Kindness Scholarship, providing educational support each year for children raised by grandparents across the United States. The audience stood in thunderous applause. Margaret cried openly. Grace simply smiled, not fully understanding how one small decision had inspired thousands of people. As snow gently began falling outside, Michael handed Grace a beautifully framed copy of his mother's letter. On the back, he had written his own promise that he would spend the rest of his life remembering the lessons she had reminded him of. Years later, people would remember Michael Carter as an extraordinary business leader. But those closest to him knew that his greatest achievement wasn't building a billion-dollar company. It was allowing a 7-year-old girl with a pure heart to remind him what it truly meant to be human. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't happen through wealth, power, or influence. They happen when ordinary people choose honesty over opportunity, compassion over comfort, and kindness over selfishness. One small act can ripple across countless lives, touching people we may never even meet. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with your friends and family, subscribe to our channel, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Your support allows us to continue sharing inspiring stories that remind the world goodness still exists. Sparkling Heart special request: before you leave, please comment, "Kindness always wins," if you believe one honest act can change someone's life forever. Because sometimes, the smallest hands carry the biggest hearts, and the simplest request can awaken a soul that had forgotten what truly matters.